What would you do if one day you walked into a place you helped build, only to be treated like you didn't belong? No one asked your name. No one offered you a seat. No one knew that you were the very person who wrote the rules they were violating every single day. A black woman, wearing a linen dress, carrying an old bag, no makeup, sat quietly in the grand lobby of a prestigious Manhattan bank. No one knew who she was. No one cared. All they saw was an unfit customer, and they acted like she held no worth in that space. What they didn't know was that she was Nina Ellison, the woman behind the entire customer service framework of Ellison Holdings, a founding shareholder, and the one with the power to summon the entire executive board with a single phone call. The story you're about to hear isn't just about silence. It's about how someone judged by appearances alone quietly turned an entire system upside down using nothing but calm resolve and a sharp memory. Don't look away, because sometimes the ones who are underestimated are the ones who deliver the most valuable lessons. At exactly 9:42 a.m. on a Thursday morning, Nina Ellison walked through the revolving doors of Lanemore and Drake, an upscale private bank nestled inside a marble-clad building in Midtown Manhattan. The floors gleamed like still water under the filtered light from the skylight above, and the air carried a delicately curated scent, the kind only places with serious money can afford. People spoke in low, even composed tones, as if every syllable had been rehearsed. And Nina looked like no one else there, not because she didn't belong, but because she didn't try to blend in. Nina wore a cream-colored linen dress that reached her ankles. Her outfit was neat, elegant, but without logos, metal accents, or luxury labels. Her shoes were simple flats, worn at the sides. No makeup, no jewelry, not a single sign of wealth, except for the quiet composure in her stride. Slung over her shoulder was a faded gray canvas bag, the strap slightly frayed. She walked with purpose, but everyone in the lobby seemed to simultaneously assume she had come to the wrong place. At the reception desk, a woman in a navy blazer glanced up from her computer screen just once. "Can I help you?" Her tone the kind reserved for walk-ins or low-priority clients. Nina smiled. "I have an appointment," she said softly, offering no further detail. The receptionist blinked. Her eyes swept Nina up and down, pausing at the canvas bag, the outdated shoes, and the complete absence of any visible brand. "With whom?" she asked, already convinced it was a mistake. Nina reached into her bag and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. "It's a consultation with the advisory team. Not anyone specific." The receptionist sighed. "Well, our premium client services team is currently assisting priority accounts. You may want to try our Flatbush branch. They can help with more basic requests." Nina tilted her head slightly. "I was directed here," she said calmly. "I can wait." The receptionist hesitated for a few seconds, then gestured toward a bench in the corner. "Suit yourself," she said, and turned back to her screen. Nina crossed the polished stone floor to the bench. The bench had a modern, angular design, looking more like a sculpture than a seat. It was positioned far enough from the reception desk that anyone sitting there felt distinctly separated, like an outsider. Around her, men and women in tailored suits flowed by, with leather briefcases, wireless earbuds, and conversations peppered with words like hedge fund, reallocation, and return on investment. A few people glanced at her. Most didn't bother. One woman smiled, half polite, half puzzled. Nina returned a full, warm smile. The woman didn't look her way again. She sat there watching the morning unfold as an observer. No one offered water. No one confirmed an appointment. No one asked if she needed anything. They simply, based on her appearance, her skin tone, and her silence, decided she wasn't worth serving. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Nina remained still, her legs crossed at the ankle, canvas bag by her side. A security guard walked by twice. The second time, he lingered. "Everything all right, ma'am?" he asked, standing at an angle above her. Nina looked up. "Yes, thank you." "Are you waiting for someone?" "I am." He hesitated. "Are you sure this is where you're supposed to be?" Nina smiled. "I'm certain." He nodded, still uneasy, and walked away. Across the lobby, A woman in heels and a silk blouse leaned toward her colleague, whispered something while glancing at Nina. The colleague laughed, slightly too loud. Nina closed her eyes for a moment. She wasn't surprised. She'd seen this scenario too many times. It happened in boutiques, in restaurants, in elevators, in boardrooms where she was the only one without a pedigree surname. She had chosen the linen dress deliberately. She chose that bag. The simplicity. No symbols, no slogans, no gloss. This wasn't a test. It was a reveal. What they didn't know, what no one in that room could have guessed, was that Nina Ellison owned 12% of the parent company of Linemore and Drake. Her name wasn't on any public records. Her stake was held through a trust under Ellison Capital, a shell firm designed to avoid attention. Years ago, she had personally funded the bank's entire digital advisory infrastructure. The software architecture, the client strategy, it was all from her desk. But she had chosen to step out of the spotlight, to embrace silence over status. And now she had returned, not to visit, not as a guest, but as a ghost in the machine she once built, to see if the soul of the organization still remained. A man in a three-piece suit stepped out of the elevator, laughing with two colleagues. He paused mid-laugh when he saw Nina, his brow furrowed. "Do you work here?" he asked, unsure. Nina looked up. "Not exactly." "Are you waiting for someone?" "Yes." He studied her a moment longer, then shrugged and walked off. As he passed his companion, Nina caught the whispered comment, "No badge, just sitting there forever." The voice was casual, but the meaning was sharp. Behind the reception desk, the young woman opened the internal chat window. Another lost guest. Probably here to open a savings account or complain about fees. A reply below, "That bag probably holds her lunch." Another message, "At least she's quiet." They chuckled silently behind screens, all within the bounds of professionalism. No one asked if she might be important. Because important people don't look like Nina. Important people wear Rolexes, have drivers. Important people don't sit quietly with worn shoes. And still, Nina waited. She waited because she knew what happens when people judge. She waited because sometimes the clearest mirror is silence. She waited because an uncomfortable hour today might expose what's been rotten for years. When a senior associate finally walked across the lobby and called out, "Has Miss Nina Ellison arrived yet?" A moment of confusion fell like a fog. The receptionist looked up. "I'm sorry, who?" "Nina Ellison, scheduled to preview the systems evaluation report. Appointment from the board." The receptionist looked toward the bench. Nina rose to her feet. "I believe that's me," she replied gently. Nina had barely sat back down after confirming her name when another woman approached. Her fitted managerial suit, gold-plated name tag, and meticulously applied makeup, complete with cold crimson lips, made it clear she wasn't a receptionist. She was middle management. She walked briskly toward Nina with a kind of polished caution, the type honed through high-tier customer service training. "Ma'am," she began, her voice laced with carefully engineered authority, "I'm afraid this lounge is reserved for executive platinum or institutional class clients only." Nina tilted her head slightly. "I have an appointment and was invited to wait here," she replied, her tone neither loud nor low, just enough not to be swallowed by the space. The manager smiled faintly, as if she'd just heard a common misunderstanding. "There must have been an error from the phone support team. The area you're seated in is a highly personalized guest space, meant for senior partners and strategic investors. Your advisors will escort you from the main lobby area." She said the word "your" with a slightly dipped inflection, not overtly rude, but sharp enough for any attentive ear to feel a chill. Behind Nina, a white-haired man in an expensive suit tapped away at an iPad, never looking up but smirking as he muttered to the woman beside him, "Bet she's here to apply for some petty loan or something." The woman laughed audibly, half covering her mouth, half not bothering. Nina didn't react immediately. She simply scanned the room, letting her gaze pass over each face, each expression that seemed part curious, part dismissive, part wondering why she hadn't taken the hint and left yet. No one asked if she needed help. No one checked her name again. Not a single person offered assistance or clarification. Everyone had decided a black woman in a linen dress with a worn canvas bag couldn't possibly be anyone important. The manager leaned in slightly, one hand resting on her name tag as if to emphasize her position. Would you please follow me outside? We have a general seating area across from the info desk. Nina remained still, one hand gently resting on her bag strap, unmoving. Thank you, she said softly, but I was instructed to wait here. I'll just need a few more minutes. The manager's expression shifted in an instant, from polite to tense. An unimportant person was refusing to comply. That threatened control. Ma'am, I understand you may believe this is the appropriate place, but I'm responsible for maintaining the integrity of this area for the correct clientele. Nina smiled. And you believe I am not one of them? The manager hesitated. I didn't say that. I'm just following protocol. What protocol? Nina asked again, still without raising her voice. But the steadiness in her words began drawing attention from nearby guests. The older man behind her whispered, let her sit. Security will remove her soon enough. Nina didn't turn around. She didn't need to know who said it. She knew his kind too well. Security had been called. A tall man in a black suit appeared, standing at a calculated distance. He said nothing. His eyes shifted to the manager, awaiting a cue. The manager glanced over, but didn't speak. She understood this was no longer a simple, please step out scenario. It was a situation being watched. She had to tread more carefully now. Ma'am, may I suggest this? She said, lowering her voice as if offering a compromise. I'll personally walk you to the main lounge and request a senior advisor meet you there within 10 minutes. Would that be all right? Nina looked her in the eye. I don't need anyone to meet me. I have an appointment here, and I'll wait right here. The words weren't loud, but they left no room for negotiation. The manager straightened up. The security guard remained still as stone. The air thickened. A few guests glanced over, anticipating the next move. A young woman seated near Nina whispered to her neighbor, She's probably housekeeping. The other shrugged. Weird, though. If she were staff, she wouldn't be allowed to sit here. Nina knew exactly what they were saying. She'd heard the same sentiments in board meetings, only wrapped in more elegant language. Doesn't align with the brand image? We need to evaluate our customer approach process, optimize the front-end experience. All just ways to say, we don't think people like you should be here. A young staffer rushed out from the meeting room holding a tablet. Excuse me, are you Miss Ellison? Nina turned. I am. We're terribly sorry for the delay. Please follow me to room 17F. Your meeting starts at 10 o'clock. He turned to the manager and gave a respectful nod. She's a guest of the executive board. The atmosphere shifted immediately. The manager froze. She tried to hide her eyes but couldn't mask the panic. Nina smiled. May I still wait here a few more minutes? She asked, this time addressing the manager. The woman didn't reply right away. She nodded slowly, lips dry. Of course. Of course. Sincere apologies for the misunderstanding. She stepped back, and the security guard quietly withdrew. Nina sat back down, and at that very moment, silence spread like an invisible wave. Those who had whispered now looked down. The old man behind her suddenly remembered something urgent on his iPad. Glances were redirected. No one dared to acknowledge what had just occurred. No one had thought that woman was a real guest. No one imagined she was one of the most powerful individuals in the entire system, because they hadn't even thought. They had only looked. Nina opened her canvas bag, pulled out a small notebook, and jotted down a few lines. She wasn't angry. She didn't erupt. She simply took notes, like an auditor doing her job. Every word, every glance, every gesture translated into a moral inventory. This wasn't personal. This was structural. The young employee returned, politely asking, Would you like me to escort you upstairs now, ma'am? Nina stood. No rush, but I do believe I'm ready now. The 24th floor of the Linemore and Drake building didn't resemble any other level. No clients, no ATMS, no reception signage. Instead, there were frosted glass doors, velvet-thick carpet, and nameless doors. This was the floor where the executive leadership held internal meetings, a space only accessible to those on the whitelist. That morning, the 24th floor was unusually busy. An unscheduled meeting had been called by none other than the CEO of the parent company, Ellison Holdings. The content of the email was brief. 9:45 a.m., unannounced internal review. Full attendance required, no exceptions. No one knew who was leading the review. only that it was one of the rare instances where the CEO had directly requested an urgent meeting for one person, a specially authorized representative with the power to assess service quality at premium branches without prior notice. In the main conference room, 8 individuals had already taken their seats, all regional directors, executive heads of premium client services, and directors of experience and hospitality. The atmosphere was tense but feigned composure. Everyone wore tailored suits, gleaming watches, and ties coordinated with the corporate palette. On the table, imported mineral water, luxury pens, and tablets preloaded with performance dashboards. But they all knew this wasn't a day for data presentations. Today was about answering one question. Was the system they were managing still holding on to the soul the company was built upon? A junior assistant entered, a petite woman with her hair tied high, holding an iPad. "The reviewer hasn't arrived yet," she said, slightly bowing. "We've alerted the private elevator for readiness." The man seated at the head of the table, the director of client experience, frowned slightly. "Are you sure the person received proper instructions?" The assistant nodded. "Absolutely. I just double-checked the itinerary. The reviewer entered the building at 9:20. "So where are they now?" another director asked. "What floor?" The assistant paused, uncertain. "I think they might be observing the reception process downstairs." Downstairs in the lobby, Nina was still seated. The chair she had occupied was now empty. The manager had just been called upstairs. Security had returned to his original post. A few clients still glanced around, not out of curiosity anymore, but unease. They had just witnessed something abnormal. A plainly dressed woman, who seemed out of place, had been personally summoned by a staffer from the executive meeting floor. It disrupted the logic they'd built in their heads. They weren't used to importance arriving without a polished exterior. Nina stood in front of elevator 3. The doors opened. A young staff member accompanied her, keeping a respectful distance. "The conference room on the 24th floor is ready. If you prefer, we can escort you through the VIP rear entrance." Nina shook her head. "No need. I'd like to go the regular way. With the staff. With the clients." She stepped into the elevator, pressed the 24th floor button, and as the doors closed, in that brief moment of silence, she let out a soft sigh. She wasn't surprised by what had happened in the lobby. Just disappointed. But that was why she was here. Not to reprimand, not to seek revenge, but to see whether the machine she once helped build had decayed beyond recognition. In the boardroom, the assistant's phone buzzed. A text appeared. "On the way up." She nodded slightly, whispering to the director beside her. "The reviewer is coming." The room fell silent. Everyone adjusted their ties, smoothed their jackets, checked their faces on their tablet cameras. One person reopened their backup presentation. No one knew how to greet the guest. They had never met this person. No photo, no name. Only one fact. They were appointed directly by the CEO of the parent company. The elevator stopped at the 24th floor. Nina stepped out. She hadn't changed clothes. Still the same cream-colored linen dress, canvas bag slung over her shoulder, and flat shoes. She looked down the quiet hallway. It was as silent as an old library. No footsteps, no phones ringing. The frosted door ahead bore a small inscription. Executive Boardroom. She walked up without knocking. The door opened automatically, triggered by an internal card scanner, one she had access to since 5 years ago. Inside the room, 8 people stood up in unison. At first, no one recognized her. Then the director of service, the man who had once overseen the rollout of the very system Nina had designed, froze. His eyes widened. "Nina?" His voice barely held disbelief. Another director turned. You're the one conducting today's review?" Nina walked in, unhurried. "Good morning. I'm right on time. I just had a little pause downstairs." Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet in that room, each person began to understand, and their expressions shifted from surprise to confusion to concern. "On behalf of Ellison Holdings," Nina continued, "I've been appointed by the CEO to conduct a special evaluation on the alignment between company values and actual behavior at our premium branches." No one spoke. She looked at each of them. "This is not an audit, not a technical assessment. This is a service ethics review. One man tried to maintain composure. Of course, we've been looking forward to this evaluation, and we believe we'll meet expectations. Nina nodded slightly. I hope so too. Though, what I experienced this morning gives me cause for concern. She didn't name anyone, didn't mention the receptionist, didn't bring up the manager. She left the sentence hanging, light as air, but sharp as a blade. In that moment, everyone understood. The woman they thought didn't belong in the lounge was the very person now empowered to evaluate them. And more than that, she was the one who had laid the foundational principles of the very service system they were now following protocols to uphold. Nina's light gray canvas bag, with its frayed strap and faint old ink stain in the corner, wouldn't catch the eye of the average person. But in this place, in a space designed for the elite, where every detail was measured by its luxury, the bag became the perfect target for whispered judgments. Not overt, but just noticeable enough to sting. From the moment Nina entered, her bag served as an unspoken statement. She didn't belong here. A female server carrying a tray of gleaming silver tea sets passed by and glanced down, catching sight of the bag tucked beneath Nina's chair. She pursed her lips, shook her head subtly, then smiled slyly, just enough for only the coworker beside her to notice. That bag's gotta be from some flea market, she whispered in a Queen's accented voice, laced with contempt masked as casual commentary. The colleague pretended not to hear, but smirked all the same. Neither of them knew that just a few steps later, the woman they were mocking would walk into the executive boardroom and prompt every superior they answered to rise in silence. Nearby, the same security guard from earlier, the one who had eyed Nina with cautious suspicion, was still stationed by the lounge entrance. He no longer dared approach her, especially after witnessing a senior staff member escort her to the 24th floor. Still, his gaze hadn't softened. It had shifted from hostile to quietly guarded, as if he was wondering whether he'd missed something, or whether this was all some internal prank. He muttered to a nearby employee, "If she stays 10 more minutes without anyone coming for her, I'm kicking her out." "No one gets to sit in this lounge that long without a VIP appointment." The other nodded. "Yeah, strange. Doesn't look like a bank employee either. Probably doing some paperwork or something." Fragments of conversations like that rippled around Nina. Light as passing wind, but cold enough to make anyone feel unwelcome. What stood out most was that no one asked her directly. No one approached with, "Can I help you?" No one checked her appointment. No one typed her name into the system. They just looked, judged, and concluded with their eyes. Prejudice needed no confirmation. It lived in those moments when no one bothered to ask. Nina didn't react. She remained seated, posture upright but relaxed, eyes quietly scanning every corner of the room. Each time someone muttered something nearby, she reached into her canvas bag, pulled out a small notebook, and scribbled a short line. She didn't write names, no emotions, just behaviors. Laughed while glancing at bag. Called me that woman. Said flea market. Did not check guest list. Averted eyes when caught. Her handwriting was neat, like an elementary school teacher's. She wasn't taking notes for revenge. She was taking them so she wouldn't forget. She'd been trained in environments driven by data, where everything needed to be recorded, verified, analyzed. But today wasn't about spreadsheets. It was a living audit of ethics, a real-time simulation of how apathy hides beneath polished professionalism. In a far corner, three suited men were speaking in hushed tones. They were part of a high-investment client group, often seen at financial summits that Nina herself had helped sponsor. One of them glanced over at Nina, frowning. "Who's she?" The man beside him shrugged. "No idea. Doesn't look like the usual crowd here. Probably here to ask for a lower interest rate or something." All three chuckled, a shallow, synchronized laugh. Nina didn't hear it, but she could feel it. And if she had heard, she might have written simply, "Assumed client motives. Did not inquire." For a few moments, Nina looked down at her bag. It was old, truly old. She'd carried it for 6 years through hundreds of meetings, both in Silicon Valley and at community colleges where she taught volunteer workshops. She had never replaced it, not because of the money, but because it reminded her simplicity isn't lack, it's a choice. And in a world that has forgotten how to tell the difference, That bag was a necessary reminder. The server came back, walking past Nina's chair again. This time she moved slower. As she poured tea for a nearby table, she slyly turned and snapped a photo of the bag with her phone. She sent it to the internal staff group chat. Fashion crime of the week. A reply popped up immediately. Who let her in? Another followed. Plot twist, she's the janitor. The group laughed among themselves. They had no idea that the message would be retrieved within minutes as part of an internal culture review. And they certainly didn't know that the woman with the flea market bag would be the one deciding the future of the very training program they were enrolled in. When the assistant from the 24th floor entered and called Nina's name, the room fell silent as if someone had pulled the power. The server nearly dropped her tray. The security guard whipped around. The manager from the lounge stepped out, pale. Nina stood, slinging the bag back over her shoulder as if nothing had happened. She smiled at everyone, even those who had mocked her. I'll be going now, she said quietly. Then she ascended the glass staircase leading to the private elevator section, where no one was allowed without special clearance. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Everything she needed to note had already been recorded, in her notebook, in her memory, in her heart. After stepping out of the lounge alongside the young assistant from the 24th floor, Nina walked slowly down the stone-tiled corridor, where the recessed ceiling lights cast a soft reflection on the muted gray floor. She didn't rush, and the assistant seemed to understand that this quiet wasn't accidental. Under the gentle lighting, her slender shadow stretched along the wall, as if past and present were walking side by side. The assistant spoke softly with utmost courtesy. I can escort you directly to the boardroom, but if you'd like to report your recent experience, I can assist in contacting the complaints department first. Nina tilted her head slightly. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't silent either. I think there's something I need to discuss with someone at a senior level. Her voice was even and clear, devoid of emotion. The assistant nodded, opened his tablet, tapped a few commands, then paused. Would you like me to file the complaint on your behalf, or would you prefer to speak to the customer service team directly? Nina replied, I'd like to speak with them in person. She was led down a different hallway, not through the executive wing, but to the area reserved for customer service matters. This place was nothing like the premium lounge she had just left. Gone were the warm golden lights, walnut tables, and automatic espresso machines. Here there were cold white lights, plastic chairs, industrial carpet, and a silent line of people that looked more like a bus terminal queue than a finance center. An LED screen blinked with red text. Please wait your turn. Now serving number 89. Nina received number 106. She said nothing. She quietly sat down in the seat against the wall, between two others, one a middle-aged man grumbling about a frozen credit card, and the other, an elderly woman gripping an envelope with a fax printout inside. No one knew who Nina was. No one imagined she had just been personally invited to the highest floor. They simply saw a black woman, dressed plainly, carrying a canvas bag, waiting like everyone else. A young staffer emerged from behind the glass partition, called out, Number 90. No one stood. He repeated, Number 90. The entire row remained silent. The man beside Nina muttered, Probably left already. The staffer nodded. Next up, number 91. 17 minutes later, it was Nina's turn. She stepped up to window 3, where a woman named Krista was working. Krista looked Nina up and down. No greeting, no smile, just a blunt. What's the issue? Nina said, I'd like to report how I was treated by the lounge staff this morning. Krista typed a few lines. What type of service account do you have? Nina answered, I had an appointment scheduled through an internal coordinator. Krista stopped typing. Your name? Nina Ellison. Nina looked up. Krista paused for a second, then typed faster, and then she froze. The account details appeared. Special status, marked executive oversight, trust level. Krista looked at Nina. Her eyes changed, but her voice remained flat. I'll document your concern. Would you like to fill out an official complaint form? Nina shook her head. I'm not here to file a complaint against anyone. I just want to see how the system treats people. Her answer caught Krista off guard. She'd never had a client respond like that. I'm sorry, did you say how it treats what kind of people? Nina looked at her. People who don't wear designer clothes, who don't have shiny watches, people who don't walk in looking like the kind of client a banker expects. Krista fell silent. For the first time that day, her fingers stopped moving. In the back office, a supervisor was watching the internal cameras. On screen, Nina appeared, sitting at counter 3. He recognized her. His brow furrowed. He picked up the phone and dialed the senior executive emergency line. Nina Ellison is in the customer service center. The other end went quiet for a beat. Why? She requested to report this morning's treatment. The voice on the other end lowered. Send someone down. Don't let her sit there another minute. But it was already too late. Nina had seen enough. She had sat among everyday people. She had heard the sighs of those who waited over an hour just to close a basic account. She had witnessed the impatience, the indifference, the mechanical coldness of a system she had once helped design to do the exact opposite. An internal communications officer rushed downstairs, trying to walk quickly without letting her heels click too loudly. She approached Krista and whispered something. Krista looked at Nina, then at her colleague, and quickly stood. Miss Ellison, if you'd please come with me. There's a private room where we can better receive your feedback. Nina stood, asking no questions. She knew. She always knew. She was led down a narrow corridor into a soundproof glass room. Inside there was water, fresh flowers, and a senior executive already waiting. He bowed slightly. Ms. Ellison, we sincerely apologize for your experience earlier. Nina didn't nod. She didn't smile. She simply said, I don't need an apology. I just need you to listen. And for the next 30 minutes, Nina recounted everything, not with accusation, but with a calmness that made it harder to bear. She spoke of glances, of tone, of the smallest gestures. She emphasized, no one asked if I needed help. No one confirmed my name. No one saw me as a guest until they saw my account data. But what worries me most is that if I truly had been just an ordinary person, they would have treated me like trash. The room went silent. No rebuttal, no justification, because there was none. Nina didn't submit a complaint. She didn't ask for disciplinary action. She left them with one final question. If I had been a single mother in an old sweater, coming to open her first bank account ever, would she have been treated the way I was this morning? The supervisor didn't answer. She didn't need him to, because silence in that moment was the most painful confirmation of all. After the brief conversation in the soundproof glass room, Nina left without a single word of blame. She was escorted back to the main lounge by a senior staff member who was still visibly shaken by what she had just said. But Nina no longer needed an apology. She had enough information. She had seen how the system functioned when no one was watching, and now it was time for the system to look back at itself. She returned to the lounge like an ordinary guest and sat in the same seat by the window. The same canvas bag rested beside her feet. The manager from earlier that morning was nowhere to be seen. The receptionist no longer dared to glance her way. The entire room seemed to be holding its breath, as if everyone had caught a piece of a story and was now trying to guess the rest. But Nina wasn't guessing. She knew exactly what she was about to do. She pulled a phone from her bag, an old model, without a case, without any luxury logo. A faint scratch marked the top left corner of the screen. She opened her contacts, scrolled down, and selected a single entry saved with 3 capital letters, HOL. It wasn't a name. It stood for Head of Leadership, a private line reserved for strategic shareholders of Ellison Holdings, used only when upper-tier coordination needed to be activated. Nina made the call. It rang exactly twice before the other end picked up. She didn't say much. Her opening was a calm greeting. It's Nina. Then followed a brief, precise, tone-neutral statement. I visited the Manhattan branch as planned. There are several urgent issues to address. The welcome culture is deviating from core training principles. At least 3 client standard violations have occurred, including biased assumptions, improper denial of service, and inadequate internal communication. The voice on the other end didn't interrupt. Nina continued. I need all Manhattan branch directors in conference room 24F in 5 minutes. I also want the full HR coordination team present, starting with the floor-level supervisor. Then she paused lightly as if concluding a report. Send them all to 24F in 5 minutes. The call ended. Total duration, 42 seconds. No one in the lounge heard what was said, but everyone sensed something had been activated. Nina didn't change her posture, didn't show any particular expression. She simply waited, in a silence that others couldn't quite comprehend. Meanwhile, on the 24th floor, a strategic meeting was underway, focused on the third quarter client experience. Regional directors were presenting slides, showcasing retention metrics and recent PR campaigns. Suddenly, a regional supervisor's phone vibrated. The message contained only 2 lines. Pause the meeting. Gather the entire Manhattan branch team in the boardroom in 5 minutes. Request from strategic shareholder. Simultaneously, the central screen in the room displayed an internal alert, rarely used. Level 4. Operational ethics briefing. Mandatory attendance. The room fell silent. The head of HR stood abruptly and stepped out to make a call. Assistants rushed to other floors to deliver the message. No one dared ask why. They all knew, if the request came from a strategic shareholder, it was not to be delayed. Downstairs, 3 names were called in rapid succession: the receptionist, the lounge manager, and the lobby supervisor. Each received an urgent email, accompanied by a brief note. Report to 24F, special boardroom, immediately. No explanation. The receptionist read the email, her face turning pale. The lounge manager, halfway through a rushed lunch, nearly dropped her tray upon hearing the call. The lobby supervisor still hadn't grasped what was happening. "What's so urgent?" he asked. Another quietly replied, "Seems like it's about that woman from earlier." The sentence made all 3 fall silent. As they entered the elevator to the 24th floor, none of them spoke. Their eyes met only briefly. They all understood. The events of the morning weren't as trivial as they had assumed. They thought that woman would simply walk away quietly. They thought judging by appearance was normal. They thought bias was acceptable as long as it wasn't spoken aloud. But now they were being summoned to the top floor. And that floor, they had never been invited to before. The boardroom doors opened. Nina was already standing there, in front of the large glass panel overlooking Manhattan. She didn't turn around when they entered. A member of the internal communications team announced, "Everyone is present. The meeting will begin." Nina turned, her gaze calm. She looked at each of them. Every single person in that room, from the one who said you should visit the Flatbush branch, to the guard who had planned to gently escort her out, was now standing in the space where strategic decisions were made. She stepped into the center of the room. No papers, no slides, no supporting equipment, only her voice. She spoke slowly, clearly, with no need to raise her volume. "This morning I sat in this branch's lobby for 47 minutes and no one asked if I needed anything. I was redirected to the complaints department without identity verification. I overheard whispers, mocking comments, and witnessed repeated indifference." She turned to the lounge manager. "None of you broke protocol, but all of you failed in humanity." The room remained frozen. Nina continued, "I'm not here to punish. I'm here to hold a mirror to the system I once believed in." Then she placed a small notebook on the table. "I wrote everything down, by hand, not for documentation, but as a reminder that if we lose the human lens in service, then technology, process, and reputation mean nothing." A finance director began to speak, but Nina raised her hand. "I don't need a response yet. I only want each of you to answer this for yourselves. If someone like me, dressed simply, without revealing my status, walked into your branch, how would your system treat them?" No one answered. That 42-second call wasn't just a meeting trigger. It opened a reckoning of conscience, a confrontation with something everyone knew existed, but always chose to ignore: unspoken bias. The 24th floor elevator of Linemore and Drake headquarters made no sound when it stopped. Only a soft ping echoed, just enough to signal arrival, but not enough to warn that something was about to change forever. Inside the strategic boardroom, no one spoke. The regional directors stood in a line. Behind them were department heads and representatives from the training division. They had been urgently summoned under a Level 4 ethics briefing, a directive no one ever hoped to encounter in their career. And now the elevator doors were opening. Every eye turned toward them. Nina stepped out, still in the same cream-colored linen dress, still with the faded canvas bag on her shoulder. She hadn't changed clothes, hadn't touched up her makeup, hadn't brought a laptop or any documents. Yet her footsteps echoed against the wooden floor, tightening the room's atmosphere like a vacuum seal. One regional director, the same man who had been reviewing the media campaign budget just that morning, froze at the sight of her. His eyes narrowed in disbelief. "You? You're the internal auditor?" he asked, voice barely above a breath. Nina paused. She didn't answer right away. She looked around the room, high ceilings, soft lighting, closed curtains, and a wall of glass reflecting the golden-orange hue of the late afternoon sun over the city. Every person in this room had at some point signed off on the standardized service protocols. They had confidence in the system, in the procedures, but now no one spoke. Because they knew the woman standing before them didn't resemble anyone who had ever been sent to conduct an evaluation. No badge, no thick report binder. But she possessed something none of them had, the kind of silence that commands the room. At that moment, the central screen flickered on. A video call was connecting. The face of the CEO of Ellison Holdings appeared, a salt and pepper-haired man in glasses, wearing a charcoal gray turtleneck, seated in a simple room with wooden bookshelves behind him. No commanding imagery was needed, because he didn't need to prove authority. He simply embodied it. He smiled upon seeing Nina standing at the center of the room. "Good, everyone is here." A few people gave small nods. One swallowed audibly. Another folded their hands in front of them like awaiting a verdict. The CEO glanced across the room. "I know this meeting was called abruptly, and I know many of you are wondering why we've paused all operations just for an internal review. Let me clarify." He leaned forward slightly. His voice wasn't loud but sharp as a razor. "The woman standing before you is not just an internal reviewer. She is the very person who wrote the customer service code you are now violating." A small clatter broke the silence. Someone had dropped a pen. No one bent to pick it up. The entire room froze. The CEO continued. "When our service system was overhauled 5 years ago, it was Nina Ellison who designed the entire customer experience framework, from bias-free engagement principles to data safeguards for equitable service delivery. She doesn't need an introduction, because she is the reason we have the system we do today." A silent shockwave passed through the room. Those who had once stood confidently on conference stages now had nowhere to hide their faces. The receptionist who once said, "You should try the local branch," was now standing in the back, eyes red. The lounge manager stared hard at the floor, as if hoping to disappear into the wood grain. A department lead turned toward the exit, unwilling to meet Nina's gaze. Nina remained still. She didn't gloat. She didn't raise an eyebrow. She simply clasped her hands in front of her and gave a subtle nod toward the CEO. He looked back at her and smiled. "She didn't come here to audit. She came here to do something we've forgotten how to do, to listen to what's not being said." Then he turned to the room. "And the truth is, if someone like her can walk into this institution and no one recognizes the value of her humanity, then the problem isn't her. It's the entire structure you've sworn to uphold." No one could speak. The twist had landed. Nothing more needed to be said. The woman who was told to leave the lounge, redirected to the complaints desk, judged by appearance, now stood before them as a mirror reflecting everything they didn't want to see. Nina took a step forward. She looked at the 3 staff members in the corner, the ones who had directly interacted with her earlier that morning, not with a heavy gaze, not with blame, but with a slow, steady look, as if silently asking, "Do you remember me now?" None of them dared to answer. A regional director, who had once attended a service culture seminar Nina had led 3 years ago, finally murmured, I'm sorry." Nina didn't respond. She turned to the CEO on the screen. "With your permission, I'd like to begin my presentation." He nodded. "You have full authority." She stepped to the center of the room, opened her canvas bag, and pulled out a notebook. Not an iPad, no slide deck, just a worn notebook with pages slightly bent at the corners. She placed it on the glass table, and in a calm, even voice, she said, "I've recorded every behavior, not to report them, but to compare them with the very code you ask your staff to uphold every day." Then she turned each page. Each one contained a behavior, a phrase, a glance. No one was named, but everyone felt seen. No dramatics, no accusations. She simply held up a mirror and let them see themselves through her words. The boardroom on the 24th floor was as silent as a chapel after the doors had been closed. After an opening that required no slides, no effects, just words and presence, Nina placed her hands on the old leather notebook in front of her. She did not sit. She didn't need to. She stood there, spine straight, both hands gently resting on the cover, and spoke in a calm voice that somehow anchored everyone into their seats. I won't name names. I won't point fingers. But I will repeat every word I recorded. And if you hear yourself in it, maybe it's time to ask how far we've drifted from what we were supposed to protect. She opened to the first page. Her finger skimmed over the handwritten line. You should try the local branch. This area is for priority clients only. She looked up, not at anyone directly, but everyone in the room knew who had said it. The young receptionist in the back wrung her hands together, her face pale. She wasn't named, but she was seen. Nina didn't smile. She didn't raise her voice. She simply read, I don't think that came from malice. I think it came from habit, a habit more dangerous than cruelty. Next page. That bag must be from a flea market. A dry swallow echoed from the far left corner of the room. She kept going. If she stays longer, I'll ask her to leave. Who is she? Doesn't look like the kind of person we usually see here. Plot twist, she's the janitor. Each line landed like a slap, not because it was loud, but because it was real, familiar, and far too easy to deny when no one writes it down. Nina raised her eyes for the first time, locking gazes with the whole room. I'm not repeating these phrases to shame you. I'm repeating them to remind you that it's exactly these phrases, small, quick, seemingly meaningless, that shape the culture of an organization. She stepped slowly toward the center of the room. I used to believe that kindness could be taught, that if we trained enough, reminded enough, practiced enough, people would behave better. She stopped right at the center of the company's engraved glass table logo. But today I realize arrogance has been trained better. No one objected. No one said she was wrong, because they knew she wasn't. Nina didn't target anyone. She simply held up a mirror and made them look. At the far end of the room, the CEO on the screen said nothing. He simply placed his hand under his chin and nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a crack he had allowed to form. Nina continued, I used to think that if we built the right systems, crafted the right rules, selected the right people, then service culture would uphold human dignity. But I was wrong. No policy is stronger than unconscious bias. No checklist can fix a judgmental glance. She turned. We've built a machine that can measure everything, except dignity. The air grew heavier. Some people lowered their heads. Some stared at the ceiling. Others clenched their hands under the table. Nina walked over to the whiteboard in the corner of the room, picked up a marker, and wrote 3 lines. I was not welcomed, I was not verified, I was not treated as human. She turned around. These 3 things, if they can happen to me, a strategic shareholder, how many others are experiencing worse without anyone documenting it? No one answered, but she didn't need a response. For the first time during the entire meeting, a regional director raised his hand. Ms. Ellison, if I may, what would you like us to do after this meeting? Nina looked at him for a moment, then gently placed the marker down. I don't want you to do anything. I want you to recognize how long you've done nothing. The reply drained the oxygen from the room. And then, decisions began to unfold. Not through shouting, not through blame, but through truth. And truth made it impossible to stay comfortable any longer. The CEO nodded from the screen. We will initiate a full internal review across the entire system within the next 48 hours. Every branch will be required to submit reports not on policy violations, but on violations of dignity. A regional executive suggested, we need a retraining program, not theoretical, practical. Nina nodded. Have employees spend 1 day as clients? No advance notice, no special privileges. Let them sit beneath the gaze they've used to judge others. The meeting was no longer a meeting. It became a turning point. The room, once a symbol of control, had now become the place where awareness began. After Nina concluded her presentation and left the boardroom on the 24th floor, silence lingered like a void no one could fill. No one applauded. No one reached for their phones. Each person was sitting face to face with a version of themselves, the version they had spent years justifying, dressing in professionalism to avoid. But today there was nowhere left to hide. A dismantling had begun, not with machinery or legal memos, but with truth that could no longer be denied. Just 3 hours after the meeting, 3 names were suspended. Not the usual paid administrative leave, but a formal suspension pending investigation, under direct oversight from the Corporate Ethics Board. The receptionist, the lounge manager, and the lobby supervisor were instructed to surrender all system access by end of day. No lengthy explanations, no public memos, no farewell emails thanking them for their contributions. Just one clear message. The silence that once protected them was no longer a shield. It was evidence. The company's entire client evaluation system, which had been designed to classify customers by potential behavior and interaction style, was halted. Nina proposed the model be dismantled within 72 hours. She didn't demand it through an executive order. She simply posed a single question in her follow-up memo to the executive team. If a system makes someone like me unrecognizable as a client, then who exactly does it still see as human? No one answered, but within 63 minutes of an internal leadership meeting, the entire tech team received direct orders. Eliminate all protocols that assess clients based on appearance, speech patterns, or nonverbal behavior. The shutdown command was issued even before formal paperwork was signed. Everyone understood. Delay wouldn't just corrupt data, it would destroy trust. Nina didn't stay at the operations center. She left immediately after the meeting, but before walking out of headquarters, she submitted a 16-page document. No fancy title, just one line in bold: mirror first, draft for implementation. Beneath it, a small caption read, "No one should be trained to look at others before learning how to look at themselves." Mirror First was Ellison Holdings' first internal culture reform initiative in nearly a decade, after years of letting their training philosophy sit unchanged. In her proposal, Nina didn't ask for new budgets, didn't propose software upgrades, didn't draft old-school checklists. She offered a single principle. Every employee, from receptionist to security guard to branch director, must spend at least one day as an anonymous customer in their own system. No access privileges, no internal emails, no name tag, no advance notice. One day living as someone else, to see how the system truly treats people when it doesn't know who they are. The proposal was approved in less than a week. A special coordination team was formed, not from upper-level directors, but entirely from employees the system had once overlooked. Warehouse staff, counter clerks, part-time contractors. They were invited to design the new empathy training experience. They didn't need to understand advanced client behavior modeling or multi-tier service segmentation. They only needed to describe what it felt like to be forgotten. 82 branches nationwide were re-audited. No warning emails, no flag calendars. Each branch was monitored via silent cameras, real-time customer surveys, and timing metrics of first contact interactions with people lacking any documented assets. The branches previously ranked excellent turned out to be where the most bias occurred because they had become too comfortable with high standards and forgotten that standards aren't suits or hairstyles. For the first time in company history, the executive board issued a radical policy. All internal employee performance metrics tied to subjective impressions of clients were to be deleted. No more does not align with brand image unless substantiated. No more vague columns like demeanor appropriate for luxury setting. From now on, only 2 metrics remain: responsiveness to those without power and service time for those without visible wealth. According to Nina, these 2 were the most accurate clocks of a company's culture. A full cultural reform had begun. No banners, no launch ceremony, no hashtags, just eyes beginning to change. Internal emails shifting from "sorry if you felt that way" to "I take responsibility for how I acted." Training materials rewritten using real examples. No more white models in designer suits grinning like stock photos. Short video clips of staff interacting with quiet customers were now shown in team meetings. Not to praise or shame, but to ask, if this were you, what would you have done differently? The system didn't become perfect overnight, but it began to breathe again. Those who had once remained silent for fear of judgment were now being invited to tell their stories. A young employee named Jody, once called slow for a mild stutter, was now the lead facilitator for Mirror First in the Northeast region. A security guard named Malik, once criticized for not engaging enough with guests, was chosen to oversee real-time behavioral assessments of staff. Not because he talked more, but because he saw deeper. And at the center of it all was still Nina's notebook. Its pages never posted online, never attached to official files, but photocopied and sent to every branch manager with one handwritten note. Don't let anyone have to write these words ever again. 2 weeks after the 24th floor meeting, following urgent assessments and quiet reforms, Nina returned to the Linemore and Drake Manhattan branch. The very place where she had once sat silently for nearly an hour without a single person asking if she needed help. This time she didn't carry a faded canvas tote. She wasn't wearing a cotton dress. She walked in wearing a neat, neutral-tone professional outfit, her hair gently pinned back, carrying a slim, tan leather case. She wasn't trying to disguise herself, but she wasn't seeking attention either. She just wanted to know, after everything, had this place changed when no one suspected she was someone important? The moment she stepped through the revolving glass doors, she was greeted with a smile from a new receptionist. A young black woman, bright-eyed, dressed in a simple beige uniform, neat, professional, no name tag, just a small embroidered Ellison Bank logo on her shirt. The woman didn't scan Nina from head to toe. She didn't size up her hair, her bag, or her watch. She simply smiled, looked Nina straight in the eye and said, "Welcome to Ellison Bank. How can I help you today?" No script. No, "Do you have an appointment?" No assumptions. Just a greeting. And for Nina, that greeting alone was proof enough. What she had planted was beginning to sprout. She smiled in return. Her eyes softened, not from surprise, but from the realization that real change often begins with the smallest things. She replied, "Start by remembering this. Everyone is someone." The receptionist tilted her head slightly, caught off guard by the unscripted comment. But she didn't question it. She just smiled and nodded, as if understanding more than she let on. Nina continued into the main hall. Everything looked the same. The wooden desk, the warm lighting, the gleaming stone floors. But the atmosphere felt lighter, easier to breathe. The glances weren't like invisible scanners anymore, sweeping over leather wallets and designer shoes. Employees who passed by made direct eye contact instead of side glances. A middle-aged man in khakis and a simple shirt was seated in the lounge that had once been reserved for premium appointment holders only. A young mother with a stroller was offered a warm cup of water for her baby, without needing to ask. Small things, yes, but they were no longer rare. Nina didn't tell anyone she was back. She didn't ask to see the branch manager. She didn't go up to the 24th floor. She simply walked through, like a real customer. She sat down in the lounge, pulled out her phone, and reread the internal email outlining the Mirror First initiative, as if quietly fact-checking reality. No one approached to ask if she was in the correct area. No one requested an ID. One employee came by, gave a respectful nod, and said, "If there's anything you need, I'm always happy to help." Nina smiled, nodded back, and replied, "No need. You've already done enough." As she stood to leave, she paused briefly at the reception desk. Just behind the counter, right at customer eye level, there was a new line of text, not hastily printed, not some marketing slogan. It had been laser-etched into a transparent acrylic plaque, mounted just beneath the staff computer screen. Dignity isn't earned by clothes. It's shown by how you treat others. She didn't take a picture, didn't post it online, didn't tell anyone. But in Nina's eyes was the calm of a mountain finally exhaling. She walked away without looking back, because she knew, this time, there would be no need to write another page in her notebook. Across other branches nationwide, similar plaques began to appear. Not by mandatory order, but at the request of the managers themselves. Not to avoid legal trouble, but because they, after going through mirror first, finally understood. Maybe the reason we are respected has never been about polished shoes, an expensive suit, or a title on a nameplate, but about how we listen to someone when they don't need to prove anything, how we see a person without looking through the layer they're wearing, how we treat others when no one is watching. And maybe what truly healed this system wasn't the big decisions, but the small words, the glances that paused, and a silent sign placed behind the reception desk just to remind us all, dignity isn't earned by clothes. It's shown by how you treat others. If you've ever been judged just for how you look, if you've ever stayed silent when someone else was being dismissed, if you believe that justice doesn't need noise, but it does need someone to stand at the right time, then you are already part of this story. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever seen a little bit of Nina in yourself or in someone close to you? And if you believe in stories that are kind, layered, and deeply human, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of the journeys ahead. Because sometimes the twist isn't at the end of the story. It's in how you chose to see someone from the very beginning. Thank you for watching until the very last moment.